My name is Kevin Sneddon, and my topic is about whether or not violent video games cause violent behavior. Now, whether or not violent video games like Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty cause violent behavior has been widely debated. I'm sure many of you have seen articles similar to these ones that link violent video games to violent crimes. But are violent video games really to blame for these crimes? Or is there other information that isn't being looked into?
People who want to blame violent video games for IRL violence point to a literature that they believe supplies evidence for a link, but almost none of it does. Much of it shows an association or a link between violent video games and aggressive thoughts or violent imagining in the short term. But I'd counter that reading a sad book would lead you to sad thoughts in the short term. But no one would say that causes depression. Moreover, there's a problem here. Studies in controversial areas like this are often subject to publication bias. In this case, the term describes the fact that it's sometimes much easier to get a study with a positive result published than a negative one. If that's the case, then a review of the literature is not really capturing the truth. It's only showing one biased side of it.
In this clip done by Dr. Aaron Carroll, Vice Director of Health Policy and Research at the University of Indiana, he talks about how there are issues in how research is done on how violent video games affects one's behaviors, and how the studies are often victim of publication bias. A 2015 meta-analysis done by Christopher Ferguson, who has a PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Stetson, found that there is significant publication bias on the topic of violent video games and how they affect behavior. Ferguson found that many of these studies shared similar problems and flaws in how research was done. And overall, he concluded that there was a very minimal link between violent behavior and violent video games.
A series of experiments in 2014 focused on competence. They made games more or less difficult by making the controls easy or hard to use, or by changing the challenge level of the game itself. And when the participants felt like a bad player, they showed more aggressive feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. Whether the game was violent or not didn't even matter. I mean, there's a whole genre of YouTube videos of this.
This clip by Hank Green further illustrates how there are many variables when it comes to researching this topic, and many studies are unable to account for these variables, which skews their results. There's even less evidence that violent video games cause violent behavior if you look at crime statistics in America. Looking here at the US crime rate among juveniles, you can see that it is at a 40-year low. And when upwards of 90% of kids are playing video games, can you really say that violent video games are responsible for violent behavior? Overall, I think it is easy to say that violent video games are not responsible for violent behavior. And when you take a look at these incidents of violent crime being linked to violent video games, if one just takes into account other variables like one's mental health and family life, that the impact violent video games had